Oh yeah, what is this weird gyration going on? This strange rock and roll motion that we see here on the internet. Ultrabunny and ears and bleeding. Well, it must be the guy who wears his own t-shirt. Yes. Moi, Malcolm Tent, coming at you. Live. That might be an E. Live on the dreaded Facebook. That is, if you're watching here and now. If you're not, you must be watching me on YouTube. On my YouTube channel where I archive all this bourgeois. Yes, Malcolm Tent. What qualifies me to do this? Well, I don't know. Sheer chutzpah, gall, the gift of gab, shamelessness, probably all of the above. Couple that with 21 years standing behind the counter of a record store, Trash American style, in Danbury, Connecticut. And before that, a couple of years behind the counter at the Great Open Books and Records in North Miami Beach. And since then, the better part of 14 years, winging it here in the so-called real world, buying, selling, and trading records at thrift shops, at, what's the word I'm looking for? It's been such a long time since I've had to use terms like flea market, record swap, punk rock gig, hipster event. You know, any place I could set up a table and sell records, that's where you'll find me for the last 14 years. The last year accepted, of course. So I've got qualifications, kids. Not only that, I've been collecting records since I was 5 years old. 5 years old. That's 5 years old. So yeah, why not take this internet technology and talk to you, the people, about music and records? Hello. I want to see some people chime in and let me know that they are there, because as usual, the technology is extremely glitchy and very annoying and very weird. I can't see the counter. I can see the live indicator on the upper left-hand corner of my screen, but I have no idea if I actually am going out live and if anybody's seeing me and or hearing me. So let's have a couple of people chime in, if you would, please, just to let a tired old man know that you're out there. And once I know that I do have an audience and that this effing Facebook thing hasn't set me to private, where I'm playing to an audience of 0. I see. My former employee, Logan Butler, who has morphed into a mighty fine record seller on his own. Very cool. Logan's tuned in. Jay Gray is tuned in. He's playing the Immortal Germs. The Germs of the Starwood. Wow, that's a thing, man. John Adam, my main dog down in North Carolina. Welcome. Thanks for tuning in. And we got somebody else who's tuned in as well. The Immortal Bean Pie. All right. Jay Gray said, "Yep, I see your ugly mug, baby." That's how you know he's tuned in to Tent Talks Tunes. All right, let's take a look at the bulletin board, shall we? Let's see what's going on here in the wonderful world of me. Good mail week this week. It consisted of exactly one package, but you know I've always been about quality over quantity. My good pal Dennis Highland down in Mobile, Alabama sent me something, and you can tell that Dennis is a regular viewer because he knows what I like. I'm very public about what I like. I trumpet my taste. It's what I do. And Dennis sent me a package containing not only a vintage 1966 Batman trading card, and mind you, I watched Batman on TV in 1966 and then in reruns over the next couple of years. I got in trouble. I got in really bad trouble on more than one occasion when I was a little kid, because if you've ever seen the Batman TV show starring Adam West, they would quite often have scenes where Batman and Robin had the batarang and the bat rope, and they were rappelling up the side of a building on the rope. And you could see them like leg walking up the side of the building, grabbing the rope. And so I was a little kid, and we had a TV antenna on the outside of the house. It was mounted on a long pole, and on top of the long pole over the roof was a big aerial antenna. You still see them every now and again, but it used to be that every home had one. Because if you wanted to watch TV, you literally had to tune in on your TV set, like the Cramps. And so I really wanted to be like Batman and Robin rappelling up the side of the building. So I went to the pole on the side of my house and would rappel up the pole and see how far I could get. I never quite made it up to the roof. But I got pretty close. At least it seemed like I did. I was very young at the time. And I probably would have gotten away with it, except I left footprints up the side of the house, and my mom was very upset about that. She had to go outside and scrub all the footprints off the side of the house with a broom and a bucket of soapy water, and I got in trouble, but whatever. That's what happens when you watch Batman at a young age. You try to emulate it. Dennis also has me pegged because he sent me a variety of foreign coins, including a Bahamian 10-cent piece with a scalloped edge. Can you see that? It's a scalloped edge and a couple of fish on it. And some lovely German pfennigs from the mid-70s. These are the kind of foreign coins that were laying around when I was a kid in the 70s. And a lovely wheat cent. Great stuff, man. Thank you, Dennis. Oh, I forgot to mention the other thing that Dennis sent me. Oh, man. This really made me pop my cork. I got to tell you folks right now, I'm not really a fan of dirty humor. I'm not a big fan of porno humor. I'm really not a big fan of the risque. But I've probably said in the past that Rudy Ray Moore, this guy is hilarious. Rudy Ray Moore. So Dennis sent me a genuine copy of Close Encounter of the Sex Kind by Rudy Ray Moore, autographed, to May. That is cool. Dennis, thank you so much for sending me these bodacious goodies. I got something I'm going to send you in return. I'm going to be a bit of a spoiler. I'm going to show it to you because you don't know what it is. So it doesn't matter if I show it to you and all the frantic fans and loyal listeners out there. But Dennis, keep your eye on the mail for an album. Guaranteed catch. And don't cheat. Don't look it up. I'm sending you this Guaranteed Catch album. I love this album. Love this album. Nobody knows about it. Nobody knows what it is. Dennis, you're getting one. So watch out. Malcolm Tent, P.O. Box 3626, Newtown, Connecticut 06470, US of A. You are under no obligation. But if you want to make an old man happy, just send him something. I'll send you a Guaranteed Catch album in return because I love trade. I love swapping things with people out there. You've never heard of Guaranteed Catch, but if you have any sort of empathy for the kind of stuff I like, I'll bet you're going to like it. So that's my offer. Send me something and I'll send you a Guaranteed Catch album. And I'll bet you'll at least be amused by it. Cheers, y'all. Wetting my whistle. So yeah, let's talk about exotic foreign pressings. You know, that this might sort of link back to my love of collecting coins, you know, because an American coin is different from a German coin, and a German coin is different from a Bahamian coin. It just might also be my generalized love of the unusual and the obscure and the arcane. I'm always spotting differences, you know. It's like years and years and years of buying record collections, which I still do, and putting out records and trading with other labels. I just love getting a record and scrutinizing it, reading the liner notes, looking at the pictures, looking at the vinyl, the labels, and you always spot differences. You know, and there are many, many, many differences, sometimes quite often subtle, but a lot of times, especially dealing with foreign pressings, really blatant and overt. And those are fun, and those are the ones I'm going to kind of focus on today. First one is by everybody's favorite degenerate, and you're not going to believe what he looked like in 1980. G.G. Allin. Look at that young, pretty thing. What happened? In 1980, yeah, he was a pretty young little thing there, wasn't he? His first album, Always Was, Is, and Always Shall Be. Now, this was an album, when it came out, that did not make a huge splash. It was basically like a regional punk rock release. It was released on a New York City label, Orange Records, which was the label of David Peel. David Peel, known for like, have a marijuana, and he was kind of tight with John and Yoko, and he was just like a sort of Lower East Side troubadour nut job. But he had a record label called Orange, and somehow he hooked up with G.G. Allin and released his record. And, you know, it sold in New York City, kind of. It sold in New England, kind of. But that was really about it. You know, copies did get out here and there, but it was basically just a regional release. So how odd and unusual this kind of obscure regional punk rock record should, in the early 1980s, have a Swedish pressing with an orange cover. And the first time I saw this was, I guess, in the late 80s at some time, and I'd never seen it before. And I was like, well, I don't know, is it real, is it not? I mean, it's got a licensing statement on the back, Blitz Records from Sweden. And it's got the regular orange, you know, address and phone number and all that. But what is it exactly? Sweden? How could this have possibly happened in Sweden? Who would have even known about it in Sweden? And indeed, by the looks of it, it is a genuine Swedish pressing. Everything about it looks right, you know. When you handle records so much, you kind of get a feeling for what looks right and what kind of adds up and what kind of doesn't, you know. It totally looked legit. So I had a chance to buy one a bunch of years ago in the late 80s. It was $40, and that was a lot of damn money at the time. Especially because Gigi was alive and people weren't like really super hardcore collecting his records. But I loved the guy and his music and his albums, and I was a collector. So I was like, all right, $40. I'm going to do it. So I did it. One of the rare times I've ever paid that much cash for an album. But I did it, got it, and asked around a little bit, and sure enough, it was a genuine, honest-to-gosh, licensed Swedish pressing. And it was just one of those totally random things. This dude in Sweden, as I understand the story, and remember, this is pre-internet. I didn't go on Google and research every single A, B fact of how this actually happened, but the way I heard it at the time, and the way it was explained to me, was this Swedish dude mail-ordered a copy of the record for whatever reason, loved it, and signed a licensing deal with Orange Records to release it in Sweden. And that's what they did. And I don't know how many were pressed, not too many, because even as rare as this is now, you see these American pressings a lot more than these Swedish pressings. This thing, by the way, has been counterfeited and bootlegged and reproed any number of times. So there are a lot of orange-colored covers out there and some black and white ones. But this is the real deal, man. Right here, baby. Right here. Strange, exotic foreign pressing with no real obvious reason for existing. I love that kind of stuff. This is the personal collection, too. By the way, baby, these are not for sale. If you want to see what is for sale, look up TPOS on Discogs and eBay, baby, because I got a lot of stuff for sale up there, including a lot of G.G. Allin stuff, but not my copies of Always Is Was and Always Shall Be. Just letting you know. That's what we call full disclosure. Let's talk about the great country of Mexico for a minute or two. I love Mexico. Anybody who's known me for a while or followed me on the dreaded Facebook and, you know, Instagram and YouTube and all that probably knows that for a while there, I was born with the gift of bad teeth. You know, I was raised in an era where dental hygiene was not stressed very much. And on top of that, I had weak enamel. So I've had dental problems my whole life. And for a long time, in the pre-new normal era, I would get a lot of my dental work done in Mexico. And I found Mexican dentistry to be the best. Far better than American dentistry by 2 or 3 long miles. And by being there, I just fell in love with the country and the people and the culture and the history. And I love Mexico. And it just kind of it dovetails very neatly with my love of record collecting and some of the very interesting Mexican pressings of records that there are out there and don't appear anywhere else in the world. That's really cool. And they never really made it north of the border either. You couldn't really find these things in stores very often because they, from what I understand, they were made strictly for domestic consumption in Mexico. And maybe they were exported south of the border to the countries in South America, but not really so much in the States. So, like specialty import shops would have them. This is one thing I love. This is one of many, many 4-song Beatles EPs that only came out in Mexico. Just to give you a little perspective on the size, regular 12-inch LP, Mexican 7-inch EP. Right off the bat, the scale of this thing makes it cool because it's the regular Revolver album cover, but it's the 7-inch size. And these Mexican Beatles EPs are so awesome. They were always 4 songs, and they always had a loose theme about them. This one is, let's see, Mexican song titles in Spanish, baby. This has got Dime Por Qué. This has Una Dura Noche en... These glasses aren't good enough anymore, by the way, so I'm really faking this. I really can't see what I'm doing. Una dura noche de un día. Las cosas que dijimos. Oh, sorry. Las cosas que dijimos. And Y la amo. That's right, baby. 4 songs from A Hard Day's Night on one EP with the super cool 1970s green Target label. And the extra added bonus, one of the things that makes collecting foreign records so much fun, the song titles in Spanish. Well, I can see it a lot better now. And you can see my mouth moving in the hole. So how's that? This is a piece of conceptual art, baby. Una dura noche de un día difícil. Dime por qué. Las cosas que dijimos. And Y la amo. With some English translations thoughtfully provided. There are tons of these things. One of them's all Ringo songs. And it's painful to listen to because when you take Ringo's singing out of context, like of a regular Beatles album, and put them all together, man, it's pretty tough. But it's a cool idea. There's one of all George Harrison songs. There's one of all B-sides, only appeared in Mexico. And they all have unique picture sleeves that don't appear anywhere else. That's why collecting foreign records is so much fun. And once we finally do get back to a semblance of old normality, I've got it on my list to at some point go to Mexico when I've got some dollars in my pocket, trade them into pesos at the border, and do some record shopping in Mexico. I really want to see bins full of stuff like that because you can't find them up here. Love it. Love it. Here's another really cool Mexican pressing. Now, everybody knows I got a thing for Devo. I'm out of my mind for D-E-V-O from O-H-I-O. As a matter of fact, I'll take this minute to plug the fact that I have the 4th in a series of interviews with Devo co-founder Bob Lewis. But I'll be airing soon, live on Facebook, and archived on my YouTube channel. Bob Lewis recently posted a completely unknown, hitherto undreamt of audio recording of the second ever Devo performance from 1974. And it turned my brain into a smoked chicken when I heard it the first time, because I thought I'd heard it all. Nope, now I've heard it all. And this smoked chicken of a brain that I am now in possession of is barely functioning because of it, but it feels good. It feels so good. So I set up an interview with Bob, and we go in depth about that concert and the songs in it and the performances thereof. So keep an eye on this channel, baby. You don't need a TV aerial to pick it up. You're not going to get in trouble by trying to scale the side of your house, getting to the top. All you got to do is tune into Facebook, baby, my page, for the next Bob Lewis interview. Now, Mexican pressings. Devo fans probably know of a 6-song, 12-inch single that appeared overseas called Be Stiff. It's got the first 3 Devo singles on it. Satisfaction, Jocko Homo, and Be Stiff, with all of the B-sides. It was never released in the US of A in any form whatsoever. This is the cover. That's the back. That's the front. You know, fair numbers of it came in as an import. I had to mail order mine from a place in California, but it was there. So this is the regulation UK version that was most widely imported into the US back in the 70s. Imagine my shock and awe when I was browsing through a record bin and I saw this. What the hell is that? I look on the back cover and, oh my God. It's a Mexican version of the Be Stiff EP. And I'm going to zoom right in because I have a lot easier time reading this on the screen. There you go, man. The song title's in Spanish. Satisfacción, Seduro, Mongoloide, Mojado, and Tontos Sociales. With the handy English translations underneath. Look at that art. That is absolutely unique back cover art that only appeared in Mexico. And this record, I'm telling you right now, kids, to this day, the only copy of this Mexican pressing I've ever seen is the one I'm holding in my hands right now. I'm sure there are some Uber collectors out there who've got 5 different versions, whatever. This is the only one I've ever seen. It's the only one I got. It's rare as hell. And it is super cool. Because not only is it an alternate cover, but they chose a somewhat obscure piece of art to use for it. The European version of the Satisfaction single. Now, this is where it gets so twisted and Byzantine and arcane. This is why record collecting is so much fun. The original indie release of Satisfaction that came out on Bomb Records in the US had this cover. Right? Right. The European version had this cover. Right? Right. See, Devo has always marketed their records differently in different territories. There's always been a US cover and a European cover. Why? I don't know. They've always done that. So right from the get-go, US, European. So when this extremely obscure and arcane Mexican pressing comes out, they use the European 7-inch Satisfaction cover for the Be Stiff 12-inch cover, which only came out in Mexico. It is so cool. It's so much fun to collect these things. My God, I love it. Besides the fact that it's rare as hell. And besides the fact that it's very helpful to keep me brushed up on my Spanish, I thought that my pronunciation was pretty cool. Mongoloide, Mojado, Tontos Sociales, Seduro, Satisfacción. All my friends in Nogales, let me know how I did. Yeah. Now, funny, what makes it even funnier is that this is a legit issue on Stiff Records, and Stiff had a plan for world domination. Stiff Records actually opened offices all over the world. They had a Canadian office, an American office, and a Mexican office. And from what I can tell, each office seemed to have acted independently from all the others. It wasn't like the parent corporation said, okay, here's your release schedule. This is the cover art for all of them. This is the track listing for all of them, and it's going to be the same in every territory. From what it looks like to me, each independent Stiff office in each country kind of ran things the way they wanted to and released Stiff product in a way that they saw fit. Hence, this really cool Mexican-only 12-inch single with a unique cover of the Be Stiff EP. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't care if I'm wrong. Collecting records is fun. Collecting records transcends the facts. And that's a fact. Let's drink to it, baby. next one is very odd. Maybe it's not very, very, very odd, but it's kind of a glyph. And it kind of makes me wonder how this could have happened. I'm sure everybody out there has heard me talk about 10cc. If you haven't, I'm going to talk about 10cc right now. It's time to talk about 10cc. My favorite 10cc album, kids, how dare you? This album rules on so many different levels, I can't count them. I don't even have the words. That's the front. That's the back. That's the cheaply made cover. And that is the very strange purple Mercury label. I've never seen a purple Mercury label anywhere else except on this pressing. And my cheap-ass camera might zoom in on it in a second. You might be able to actually read it. If not, sorry gang, there it is. You got to squint like I do. Long playing high fidelity, made in the Philippines. That's interesting, the Philippines. This record is so idiosyncratic and so unique and was really, it wasn't a hit. Like 10cc definitely had their hits, you know. I'm not in love, don't forget it, just a silly phase I'm going through. If you don't know that song, you've got cloth ears, baby. That song was a massive hit. And of course, the things we do for love, the things we do for love, like walking in the rain and the snow, and there's nowhere to go, and you're feeling like a part of you is dying. That's 10cc, another massive hit. This album had no massive hits, none whatsoever. I don't know about sales overseas, but in the US it went pretty much straight to the cutout bins. Most of the covers that you will see will have the telltale cut corner. That denotes a cutout. So it really wasn't the most popular album in their catalog. It's weird music. It's very, very English with its humor. And a lot of the humor is based on wordplay and musical punnery and strange instrumentation. And I just marvel at what kind of an audience such a unique and such a downright strange record would have had in the Philippines. I don't know. I don't know what kind of company wisdom or demand even would have dictated a Filipino pressing of 10cc's How Dare You. You know, the Philippines obviously have a record industry. There are not a lot, but occasional sightings of Filipino pressings of records here and there. I know that the Filipino Beatles 78s are very sought after because the Philippines, along with India and some South American countries, they kept pressing 78s well into the mid-60s. And in some instances in South America, even into the 70s. So to find a 78 RPM by the Beatles, that's cool. That's cool. And they were made in tiny, itty-bitty little quantities just for the domestic market. And of course, they're fragile. They were usually played to death. Really hard to find. So, okay, we know about the Philippine record industry for their Beatles 78s, but not for their production of American pop records quite nearly as much. So it's a real anomaly, a strange left field release that wasn't a hit, that is very specifically English in sound, coming out in the Philippines. I'd love to know why. I think it's really cool. Help me. Now we're going to talk about a thing that was a real big deal. Oh my God, what a great big deal it was in the 1980s and the 70s. All you people out there who are my age, maybe those of you who are avid students of history, remembering a time when the entire human race faced the threat of nuclear annihilation. Yeah, that was the big bugaboo back in the days. The Russians were going to nuke us. We were all going to die in a nuclear holocaust. The entire planet was going to be wiped out, all life gone, nothing but a glowing radioactive ember spiraling clumsily into the void from here on out. That was the overarching dominant paradigm of life in the 80s and the 70s and probably in the 60s and the 50s as well. We're going to be nuked by the Russians. The Cold War was in full effect. The Iron Curtain was dropped, fully in place. There was no communication between East and West, or at least not much. There were attempts to bridge the gap here and there. One of them that I'm very fond of as a record collector, and actually let me get my AV materials straight here. I'm slightly disorganized. I tried to stack these up by country, and my stack got a little bit shuffled. Where's the rest of my Eastern Bloc stuff? Ah, there we go. I might not be the most organized guy, but I am pretty quick in cleaning up my own mess. One of my favorite releases that came out in the Soviet Union that caused a great big stink, and I don't have an actual copy of it here, but this one is based on it. You can see here the Paul McCartney Unplugged album, shrink-wrapped original. This is Paul McCartney's parody on his Soviet release, which was loosely translated as Back in the USSR. Sometime in 1980, whatever, Paul McCartney recorded an album exclusively for release in the Soviet Union. And that was a big deal because you just could not get hardly anything from the Soviet Union anywhere outside of the Soviet Union unless it was an issue of Soviet Life, which was the Soviet version of Life magazine, and was designed to show you how wonderful life in Russia was at the time. You could get that, but you really couldn't get records made in the Soviet Union. So for Paul McCartney to actually release a Soviet-only LP with material that was not available anywhere else, it was all rock and roll covers, for record collectors, that was a big damn deal. And when the first few copies of that Paul McCartney Soviet album leaked out and sort of trickled over into the States, man, they sold for big bucks. I remember seeing them. The first one I ever saw was at a record show in Washington, D.C. It was $300. And people were like fighting over it. And they would turn up occasionally, here and there, once in a while. And they would sell for that kind of money, $300, $200, $150, whatever you could get for one of those things. It was a 3-digit album. But you can say whatever you want about the Soviet Union and good old Soviet-style communism. They knew the value of $1 or a ruble or a Paul McCartney Soviet record. And I heard this story from a friend of mine in Washington, D.C., oddly enough, who worked at a record store down there. The deal is, at the Soviet Union, because they're Soviet ambassadors and, staff workers or whatever, and they would, be in Washington, D.C., some of them were music fans. The word kind of got out to the Soviet Union that people really wanted these Paul McCartney albums. I should say the Soviet embassy. So the Soviet embassy, the people in the embassy were like, oh, really? Why don't we just call up the Home Office or whoever and get a pallet full of Paul McCartney Soviet Union albums? By whatever means they were able to, the Soviet embassy in D.C. was now getting plane loads of Paul McCartney Soviet Union albums. Like cargo planes full of them. I would love to know by what machinations that happened. What palms had to be greased, what kind of cultural exchange had to be made, how many pairs of Levi's they had to send over there to trade for Paul McCartney records. But in a very short order, those $300 Paul McCartney records were clogging the dollar bins because there were just so many of them out there, and so many of them were poorly shipped. So the covers all had ring wear on them, and the corners were all bent and dinged and bashed in, and bent and stained. I mean, they were not much of a top shelf item anymore. They were just all of a sudden dollar bin junk. And to this day, I just feel so bad for those guys who actually paid the huge money for those things when they first came out, because they got stiff. They got left holding the bag. And to this day, it's like they're not dollar bin records anymore, but you still see them out there. I usually sell them for like $8 or $10, but they're not $300 records anymore. But for one brief moment, the red star shone brightly over American record collectors. And they really wanted those Paul McCartney, back in the USSR, Soviet-only albums. And here's an imponderable. I've never researched this, but maybe the internet research team can tell me if that album has been released in the US and elsewhere. Has the Paul McCartney Soviet album of rock and roll oldies been reissued officially finally here in the States and elsewhere? Please post your comments. I would love to see them. Inquiring minds got to know. Now, I did mention that stuff from behind the Iron Curtain. And I should mention, too, that you can usually find, like, really stodgy, horribly boring Soviet albums of, like, Russian folk music and dirge symphonies and terribly dreary national anthems. Like, that kind of stuff pressed on the Russian Melodia label, that did make it over here to the States. And lots of it. Great Russian folk melodies from the 17th century played on an old Vodafone somewhere. Not really much of a market for that. But there was a big market for Paul McCartney records and also, of course, Beatles records. And this is another one of those strange bubbles. When is the last time you or anybody else ever saw a record by a Western pop group pressed in Bulgaria? Bulgaria! Well, here's one for you. Bulgarian pressing of the Beatles. This is the bog standard, been around the block 487,000 times, the Beatles and Tony Sheridan sessions, as originally released on Polydor. And Polydor, of course, kept the rights to the Beatles and Tony Sheridan sessions, which have been repackaged an infinite number of times in an infinite number of countries with an infinite number of covers, usually a variant of this, since 1961. But the Bulgarian pressing? That's just bizarre. I don't think even albums of Bulgarian folk music ever made it to the US. And there it is on the extremely cheap and ugly Balkanton label with somebody's name written on it. Bulgaria. Unbelievable. There you can see it in English. Bulgarian. It's got Cyrillic and English script on it. It's another one of those imponderables. Like, what kind of bureaucratic favor was made to where all of a sudden these Bulgarian Beatles records flooded the market? They didn't flood the market nearly as badly as the Paul McCartney, but these were pretty common for a while. You could go into pretty much any store, at least in South Florida when I was a kid, in the 70s and 80s. And you'd see these all over the place. They were like $5 or $6. They were cheap. That's the cover. It's paper. If they were trying to impress people with Eastern Bloc manufacturing techniques, I don't think they did. But they were cheap, and they were exotic, and it was kind of fun. Beatles Bulgarian pressing. Nowadays, you've probably got 17 dozen Bulgarian black metal bands releasing albums and sending them to the States. But back then, this was rare shite. This was exotic. From behind the Iron Curtain. God damn. One more Iron Curtain item. And this one's kind of poignant, actually. These came from Poland. And they weren't exactly common, but if you looked hard enough and if you looked in the right place, you could find them. What is it, you might ask? Well, it's a postcard. It is a postcard with a hole in the middle, and as you can see by the reflection from my monitor, it's got a circle embossed on it. That's grooves, baby. This is actually a record pressed onto a postcard. And the postcard could have any design. To use the term again, an almost infinite number of designs, from, you know, pictures of mountains to, you know, some kind of modern art, or, you know, the Estonian president or whatever. And the backs were usually just plain old blank postcard backs. Although sometimes you would see an inscription stamped on it. Who, my generation. What the hell is this? Why is this a postcard? Just a generic, regular old, kind of ugly postcard from Poland. It's got music on it. When you play it, sure enough, it is the Who, My Generation. In what is absolutely, I guarantee you, the worst sounding, lowest fidelity that the human mind could conceive of. This thing is barely listenable. Just barely. But it's poignant because it shows you the lengths that people behind the Iron Curtain had to go to and would go to in order to hear rock and roll. Because Western rock and roll was considered decadent, and it was forbidden in the communist countries. And listening to rock and roll, if you were caught, meant punishment. And of course, you know, the Eastern communist countries didn't make rock and roll records. Toward the end, I believe there was an official authorized version of the Beatles' Let It Be. So here's the Beatles again. But by and large, it didn't happen. And I can't stress again, you would be punished. You'd be sent to jail if you were caught by the authorities listening to Western rock and roll. So in Poland, they found this neat little workaround. And this is kind of conjecture. I'm going to guess that the playable postcard was a commodity. And I'm going to guess that, as usual, you could buy a postcard in a gift shop and you'd play it and they would have the Polish national anthem on it, or some speech by some boring Comintern, or it would have an ancient, you know, Balkan folk melody or whatever. You could get the regular approved music. But somebody at the postcard factory, probably under great risk, was able to somehow secure, I'm going to guess, a like really shitty sounding bootleg cassette of this decadent rock and roll from the West that had most likely been copied one generation after another, after another, after another, and surreptitiously made up these postcards and then sent them out. You know, no markings. I'm going to guess the rubber stamp was aftermarket. I really don't know. But the postcards themselves, since they were completely generic and anonymous, could be widely distributed. And I guess it worked because there are many, many, many of these. And as I remember, once again, after the disillusion of the Soviet Empire, all of a sudden these Polish postcard records were like everywhere. Like thousands of them. And they were so lo-fi that nobody really wanted them. But I think as a cultural artifact, they're fascinating. And a reminder of the power of rock and roll, that people would go to these lengths and under such danger to hear and distribute rock and roll. That's pretty cool. That's pre-Solidarity. That's Poland when it was really, really dangerous to like anything that was not Polish. So a salute to the enterprising Poles who came up with that idea and got that evil, nasty, decadent rock and roll out to the people who wanted to hear it. Cheers. Let's see. I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm going to wrap this up pretty quickly. I was going to do a little bit of a screed on the strange phenomenon of the records pressed in Barbados in the West Indies. For some bizarre reason, in the late 70s and early 80s, all these copies of Alice Cooper, Muscle of Love, started popping up in the cutout bins of South Florida, and they were all pressed in Barbados. An Alice Cooper record with full packaging and everything, pressed in the West Indies. And the only record I've ever seen, ever, pressed in Barbados, besides that one, was one single copy of Alice Cooper Goes to Hell. Alice Cooper in the West Indies? Someone's got to explain it to me, because I don't get it. Don't get it. I like it, but I don't get it. All right, I'm going to wrap up now. Oh wait, actually, I got to mention this one. This one's just so much fun. Exotic Foreign Pressing. We all know this. Public Image Limited, the first album, first issue, released in Europe. Never released in the US at the time, but there was one pressing in Australia. Came out on translucent, clear vinyl. The only, as far as I know, contemporary extant colored vinyl by Public Image Limited. And it came out in Australia on an Australian label called Wizard, whereas all their other releases were on Virgin. And in the States, either Warner Brothers, Elektra, or Island. Wizard, Australian only. Translucent colored vinyl, Australian only. And with, kind of like that 10cc record I talked about, a really obscure niche album that never hit the top 10 anywhere, except maybe Australia? I don't know. It's just one of those really weird things, man. Why there? Why the deluxe colored vinyl treatment? And why of this album in particular? It's a mystery. Maybe some of my Australian friends or New Zealander friends who are watching right now, Stefan, can clue me in on that. Because I want to know. Now these you would see all over the damn place, and you still do, because they're so cheap, and they're so chintzy, and they're so flimsy, and they're so shoddy that nobody ever wanted them, with the possible exception of me, because they're just so bad. They're just so bad. I'm talking about the Taiwanese pressings. Look at the Taiwanese pressings of American albums, straight from Taiwan. Paper sleeves, right? Printed paper sleeves, badly laminated and badly printed, cheaply pressed on all kinds of really cheap, shoddy, badly done labels such as World Record. And if you notice, these things are awesome because they're chock full of bad English translations. The cover does indeed say Bill Cosby, but something got lost in the translation because on the label it says Bill Cozy. And that's just a minor example of the awesome, fantastic, bad English on these things. Bill Cozy on World Record. Not only that, look at the graphics. Look at the graphics on this thing. My cheap-ass camera doesn't do it justice. I mean, the color scheme, the way they cut him out and pasted him on the orange background. Man, his hand is a different color from his face. His lips are orange. His ears. I mean, look at that. That is just so wonderfully, beautifully bad. It's terrible. Because these things were made at the cheapest possible cost for the greatest amount of profit. Look at that Simon and Garfunkel. Look at Paul Simon there, man. Look at the job they did on them. The coloring, the cut and paste. That's just beautiful. I love this. And it's also, it's on the great, well, they don't name, oh yeah, they do name it. The great label, hope you can see that, Large World. The Large World record label. And yep, it's, I think it's what's it say? Allin and Garfunkel. It's Allin and Garfunkel on the Large World record label on deliciously cheap orange vinyl. They would release anything, man, over there. This is a good one. How about them Beach Boys? Why they decided to invert the S, I don't know. But there it is. This is also great because on the back, quite often you would get lyrics. And the lyric translations sometimes are just beyond surreal. Like just from a different planet. My favorite is this one here. The Rolling Stones Golden Album. This was a compilation that came out in Japan. And so this is a cheap Taiwanese knockoff. The lyrics, as they present them to Get Off of My Cloud, are just... they're psychedelic. They're schizophrenic. They're art in their own right. Sometimes when I do my solo acoustic rock and roll, yeah, me and my guitar, I will do a version of Get Off My Cloud verbatim from the Taiwanese album cover. Hope you guys can see that. The lyrics, pure poetry in a language from Mars. Somebody might have posted them somewhere. Look them up. I guarantee satisfaction. They didn't release anything. How about Muzak versions of the Rolling Stones songbook by the Andrew Loog Oldham Orchestra? Pure Muzak. I don't think this record sold 25 copies anywhere. But it was worthy of being counterfeited in Taiwan. And released once again on the great Large World label. On stunning, swept from the bottom of the factory floor, orange vinyl. I've heard a number of stories about where these things came from and why there's so many of them here in the States. One story was that they were sold to soldiers in Vietnam. And the Vietnamese soldiers brought them back with them when they came back to the States. I've also heard people tell me that they were dumped on flea markets in the 70s. You know, kind of the same deal. Somebody struck a deal to ship over plane loads of them and sell them for $1 or $2 each at the flea markets. Maybe somebody knows. Because I never once ever saw one of those for sale at a regular record store. Never. Always found them at the flea market or used somewhere. So maybe somebody knows the story behind them. But yeah, they're just so bad. They're so cheesy. And I love bad. Because I've said before, bad does not equate worthless. Bad can sometimes be really, really good. And on that note of hope, hope for bad, I'm going to sign off right now, everybody, because I've said what I got to say. Not, of course, until I remind you, my YouTube channel, please subscribe. I upload every single every single episode of Tent Talks Tunes to my YouTube channel once I'm done going live. Please feel free to subscribe, comment on my videos, let everybody know what you think. It's all about the give and take, the exchange of ideas between me and you 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 and you. That's how we get things done. Cross-pollination. So that's me on YouTube. I'm on Discogs and eBay with my fabulous record label, TPOS. You'll notice that I don't do commercials. If you look at my channel on YouTube, there's not going to be any commercial pop-ups, not on my behalf anyway. I don't do any commercials or anything like that. I rely strictly on sales of records via Discogs and eBay, and hopefully soon at record swap meets, punk rock shows, any event where I can set up a table and put some records on it and sell them. That's how I do what I do. So I appreciate your support. Same thing for my rock and roll. There's my website, malcolmtent.net. It's got all the helpful, handy links to my music and my selling. It's got lots of stories and photos and stuff that I don't have anywhere else. malcolmtent.net. There, that's the commercial. I guess I lied earlier. There is a commercial, but it's for me. And I only promote products I believe in. And I believe in this one right here, baby. Hopefully you do too. So there you go, kids. I expect to be back in about 167 hours. Until we meet again, this is Malcolm Tent saying so long from the Nutmeg State.